AITA for refusing to side with my wife after our son's ex-girlfriend claimed she was pregnant with his baby, insisting we wait for a paternity test first. I, 40M, never thought I'd be back in the middle of teenage pregnancy drama again, especially not from the parents' side of it. My wife, 39F, and I had our son, 16M, when we were only 17. It wasn't easy, but we figured things out, grew up fast, and did our best to give him a stable life. Because of that experience, I always assumed we'd be extra cautious about helping him avoid the mistakes we made. But now here we are. Our son had been dating a girl, 16F, almost 17, for a while. Typical teenage relationship. Hanging out after school, texting nonstop, the usual stuff. We thought she was nice enough. They broke up about a month ago, and I didn't think much of it. Breakups at that age happen all the time. Then, about 3 weeks ago, we got blindsided. Her parents reached out to us and said she was pregnant. Not only that, but she was already showing a little. And according to them, the timeline lined up exactly with the period when she and our son were together. When my wife and I heard the news, we both panicked. The memories of being 17 and scared came flooding back. We looked at each other across the kitchen table, both of us thinking the same thing. Not again. Not our kid. Not at 16. We waited a couple of days before breaking the news to our son. I didn't want to just blurt it out. I needed time to collect myself. But eventually, we sat him down and told him what her parents had said. His reaction was immediate. His face went pale, and he blurted, "It's not mine. I never had sex with her." I was skeptical. I know my son is sexually active. He's asked me for restocks of protection before, and I've always tried to be realistic about that. He's not a little kid anymore. Still, the way he said it caught me off guard. He was adamant, almost angry. He swore up and down that he never had intercourse with her. At first, my wife and I didn't believe him. Honestly, I didn't either, not fully. Teenagers lie. They cover their tracks. But as the hours passed, and I had some one-on-one conversations with him, I started to see something in his eyes that I hadn't expected. Sincerity. He admitted that he had cheated on her. He admitted that he had pushed boundaries. He even admitted to being a shithead in a lot of ways. But when it came to the pregnancy, he didn't waver. He swore they had never gone that far. And for reasons I can't fully explain, I began to believe him. My wife, though, she was furious. She saw my willingness to even consider his side as weakness. In her mind, the facts were simple. He was with her. She's pregnant, therefore it's his. End of story. And that's how we ended up standing on opposite sides of the same kitchen, staring at each other, both terrified, but for very different reasons. Because deep down, I wasn't sure what scared me more. The possibility that my son had gotten his girlfriend pregnant, or the possibility that I might actually believe him when he said he didn't. When we first told our son about the pregnancy, his immediate denial felt like the kind of thing any teenager would blurt out in the heat of the moment. But what surprised me was how consistent he stayed. Even after the initial shock wore off, he didn't backtrack or hesitate. He kept saying, "It's not mine. We never had sex. I swear to you, Dad." His voice cracked with frustration, but there was a steadiness underneath it. He wasn't just panicking. He was angry that no one believed him. I'll admit, I pressed him hard at first. "Don't lie to me," I told him. "You've asked me for protection before. You've told me yourself you're sexually active." He didn't deny that part. In fact, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Yeah, I use protection. Always. You know I asked you for restocks. But not with her. Not once." That's when he dropped a bomb I wasn't prepared for. He told me that with his ex, they had fooled around, sure, but never gone all the way. He even described in crude detail what they did do. Things that, frankly, I didn't need to hear, but that made it clear he was telling the truth about the limits they had set. He admitted he cheated on her with someone else, which explained why he needed condoms. But with her specifically, he insisted they never crossed that line. I sat there staring at him, torn between anger and a strange, reluctant trust. He's a teenager. He lies about stupid things all the time. Where he's been, what he's done with friends, his grades. But this didn't feel like one of those lies. There was something raw and unpolished about his honesty, even if it came out in the most obnoxious, absolute shithead way possible. My wife, however, wasn't buying it. Not for a second. To her, his explanation was just another example of boy culture and teenage bravado. She crossed her arms, her voice dripping with disdain, and said, "You expect us to believe you? That you, a 16-year-old boy, were in a relationship with a girl for months and never had sex with her? Come on." He shouted back, "Yes. That's exactly what I'm saying. Believe me or don't, but I'm not the dad." The tension in the room was unbearable. I could see the fury in my wife's eyes, not just at him, but at me for even entertaining the possibility that he was telling the truth. After he stormed off to his room, she turned on me. "You're enabling him," she snapped. "You're part of the problem. This is exactly why teen boys think they can get away with anything. They always have dads like you making excuses." Her words stung, because the last thing I want is to raise a son who thinks he's untouchable. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that he might be telling the truth. I told her, I know he's a liar, I know he's reckless, but I also know when he's bluffing. And this doesn't feel like a bluff. She shook her head, furious. You're blinded because you want to believe him. You don't want to face reality. But reality is, that girl is pregnant, and it lines up with when they were together. It doesn't matter what excuse he gives. I didn't know what to say to that. Because on paper, she's right. The timing matches, the situation makes sense. But something in my gut told me not to jump to conclusions. Not yet. And so we found ourselves at an impasse. Her, convinced he's the father and already planning for the fallout. Me, clinging to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he's telling the truth. A week later, both families agreed to sit down together. Honestly, I dreaded it. I knew it was going to be messy, but I also knew we couldn't avoid it forever. Her parents wanted answers. My wife wanted accountability. And our son, well, he wanted to shout from the rooftops that he wasn't the dad. We gathered in their living room. Me, my wife, our son, his ex-girlfriend, and her parents. The air was thick from the start, like everyone was holding their breath. My wife wasted no time. She leaned forward, hands clasped, and said, "We want to talk about how we can support your daughter and this baby. We're prepared to figure out finances, responsibilities, whatever needs to be done." Our son whipped his head toward her, eyes wide with fury. "What the hell? Mom, no. I told you it's not mine." His voice cracked, not from fear, but from sheer outrage. His ex shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her hands folded in her lap. When pressed, she admitted they hadn't had sex often. Rarely, she said, but insisted there was at least one time it happened. She described the when and where in detail, enough to make it sound believable. My son practically exploded. "That never happened. You're lying. We never had sex, not once." He was red-faced, fists clenched, his whole body shaking with anger. And then, in the heat of the argument, he blurted something I wish he hadn't. He explained that while they'd done stuff, it was only the kind of thing that doesn't lead to pregnancy. He said it bluntly, crudely, and with way too much detail, enough to make everyone in the room wince. Then he added that it was unsatisfactory, so he never pushed things further. My wife and I both erupted at him for the way he phrased it. "You don't talk like that about anyone," I snapped, embarrassed and angry. But beneath my frustration, I could still see how convinced he was. He wasn't scrambling for excuses. He truly believed what he was saying. The other parents weren't buying it. Her mom's voice was sharp, almost shaking with anger. "So you're calling our daughter a liar? You're saying she's just making this up?" My son shot back, "Yes, because it's not mine." The room descended into chaos. My wife tried to redirect, saying, "Let's not argue about details. What matters is that a baby is coming, and we need to make sure it's cared for." But every time she tried to speak, my son interrupted, furious at being talked over. He kept repeating, "You're all trying to pin this on me, and it's not mine." I sat there torn in half. On one hand, the girl's story lined up with the timeline. Her parents were adamant, and my wife was already talking like this was settled fact. But then I looked at my son, angry, desperate, clinging to his truth, and I couldn't dismiss it. As much as he acted like a shithead, I could feel he was telling the truth, at least about this. By the end of the meeting, nothing was resolved. Her parents insisted we accept responsibility. My wife sided with them, and my son stormed out swearing he wouldn't play along with this nonsense. And me? I was stuck in the middle, caught between believing my son and fearing that siding with him meant abandoning a girl who might be carrying his child. When we got back from that meeting, the house felt colder than it ever had before. My son slammed his bedroom door so hard the frame rattled, and my wife and I ended up in the kitchen, standing across from each other like we were enemies instead of partners. She didn't hold back. "I cannot believe you," she snapped. "You sat there and let him run his mouth, humiliate that poor girl, and then you defended him. You know better than he is." Her words cut deep. I shook my head, trying to stay calm, but my voice came out sharper than I intended. I didn't defend him. I told him he was being disrespectful. But I also believe him, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend he's the father without proof. She threw her hands up. "Proof? Are you kidding me? She's pregnant. The timing lines up, and you're clinging to some ridiculous story about how they never did it? You're enabling him. You're part of this toxic boy culture that lets men walk away while the girl is left to deal with everything." That accusation stung more than I expected. I know what it's like to be a teen parent. I know how hard it is. And the last thing I want is to minimize the responsibility that comes with that. But something about my son's insistence rang true, and I couldn't ignore it. I told her, "You think I'm blinded, but you're the one refusing to even consider that he might be telling the truth. He might be a liar about other things, but I know my kid. And this time, I think he's being honest." She glared at me, her voice trembling with anger. "You don't know him at all. You just don't want to admit it because it's easier to believe your precious boy than face reality. I'm the one who's going to have to clean up this mess while you sit back and wait for proof that might never come." That was the part that broke me, because she wasn't entirely wrong. I was holding back. I was refusing to dive headfirst into this because I didn't think it was fair to condemn him before we knew for certain. But to her, that hesitation looked like abandonment. The rest of the night was spent in silence. She went upstairs early, slamming the bedroom door behind her, and I stayed downstairs staring at the wall, wondering how the hell we had gotten here. Later, my son came out of his room. His eyes were still red from crying, though he tried to act tough. "You believe me, right, Dad?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Yeah, I do. But believing you doesn't fix this right now. We're stuck until we know for sure." He muttered something under his breath about how Mom would never forgive him even if the test cleared him, then disappeared back into his room. And he's probably right. Meanwhile, my wife hasn't let up. Every time we talk, it circles back to the same argument. She says I'm enabling him. I say we need proof. Neither of us is budging, and the distance between us is only growing. For the first time in years, I felt like we weren't even on the same team anymore. We were two people fighting separate battles, and the person stuck in the middle, the one tearing us apart, was our own son. After the disastrous meeting, it became clear that the only way to end the stalemate was through a paternity test. I thought that suggestion would calm everyone down, give us something concrete to work with. But instead, it only made things worse. When I brought it up to her parents, they shut it down immediately. "We're not doing that until the baby is born," her mother said firmly. "Those tests can hurt the baby." I knew enough to push back, at least a little. That's not really true anymore. Non-invasive prenatal tests exist. They're safe. We could settle this now. But they wouldn't budge. Her dad folded his arms and said, "We're not putting our daughter or grandchild at risk because your son can't take responsibility. If he's so confident, then he can wait until after the birth." That answer left us right back where we started, with accusations but no proof. When I came home and told my wife, she exploded. "Of course they don't want a test, because they don't need one. Everyone knows it's his, except you." I tried to reason with her. "That's not how this works. You don't just accept responsibility without being sure. He's 16. We can't force him to raise a child that isn't his. And if it is his, then yes, we'll deal with it. But until then, I'm not branding him a father based on someone else's word." She threw her hands in the air. "You sound delusional. You're clinging to his nonsense because you can't admit he screwed up. Do you realize how much harder this is going to be if we wait until after the baby is born? We're wasting time we should be using to plan." I could see the frustration boiling over in her, but I stood my ground. I'd rather waste time than ruin his life for something that might not be his responsibility. She looked at me with such disappointment, it almost made me doubt myself. "You're not protecting him," she said. "You're teaching him he can dodge accountability. You're teaching him the same cowardice that got us into this situation when we were his age." That cut deep. She was right about one thing. We were teen parents ourselves. We know how hard it is. We know what it feels like to be judged, abandoned, left to figure things out while everyone around you shakes their head. Maybe that's why she's so determined to make our son step up. To her, history is repeating itself, and she doesn't want to let him off the hook the way no one let us off the hook. But I see it differently. I see a boy insisting he didn't do the one thing everyone is accusing him of, and I can't shake the possibility that he's telling the truth. The worst part is the test is the only thing that can solve this, and right now, it's out of our hands. We can't force our parents. We can't go to court until the baby is born. And until then, we're stuck in limbo, tearing ourselves apart while the truth sits out of reach. Every night, I lie awake wondering which will hurt more, finding out my wife was right all along, or finding out I was, and knowing the cost of not siding with her sooner. Now we're at a standstill. My wife is furious with me for what she calls living in denial. She says I'm part of the reason boys grow up thinking they can walk away from responsibility, that I'm enabling our son to be careless while the girl and her family carry all the weight. But from my perspective, it feels reckless to condemn a 16-year-old boy as a father without any actual proof. Yes, the timing makes sense. Yes, she and her family believe it's his. Yes, my wife is convinced. But my son has been unwavering, even when he's admitted to other mistakes. And deep down, I believe him. That doesn't mean I don't take this seriously. If a paternity test proves he's the father, I'll be the first one to sit him down and tell him he has to step up. I know firsthand what it's like to be a teen parent, and I wouldn't let him shirk that responsibility. But until then, I don't think it's fair or right to treat him as guilty just because it's easier. The frustrating part is we can't even settle it now. Her parents refuse a prenatal test, and legally we can't demand one until after the birth. So until then, we're stuck in limbo, my wife and I pulling further apart every day, our son caught in the middle, and a baby whose paternity remains a question mark. AITA for refusing to side with my wife and insisting on waiting for a paternity test before treating my son as the father of his ex's baby?